You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. In the long winding legal saga surrounding R. Kelly, few pieces of alleged evidence have played a more controversial role than the infamous tape said to depict illicit activity involving the R&B singer. This so-called smoking gun, which prosecutors leaned heavily on in both public perception and court proceedings, has a history more dubious and problematic than the media would ever admit. And today, we're going to dissect it. We're going to unpack the facts surrounding this tape, from its alleged delivery to a journalist's mailbox, to its deeply compromised chain of custody, and the legal violations in its acceptance as evidence in court. Because when you strip away the media headlines, the documentaries, and the orchestrated public outrage, what's left is a piece of evidence so mishandled and so legally suspect that it had no business being introduced in a court of law, let alone used to secure convictions. Let's start with the chain of custody. In the United States, the rules for admitting evidence, especially sensitive, potentially criminal material like video or photographic evidence, are not optional suggestions. They're foundational to a fair trial. Any piece of evidence presented to a court must be authenticated. Its originality must be established. It must be proven to be what the government or any party claims it is. And perhaps most crucially, its chain of custody, that is the documented unbroken history of who had possession of the evidence from the moment it was created, through every transfer of hands up until it reaches the courtroom, must be intact and traceable. This is a basic principle of American jurisprudence. It's what prevents evidence from being tampered with, doctored, substituted, or manipulated. And it's why chain of custody is so heavily scrutinized in every trial involving physical or digital evidence. In R. Kelly's Chicago trial, this principle was flagrantly ignored. The prosecution's main piece of evidence was a VHS tape said to have been anonymously delivered to Chicago journalist Jim DeRogatis more than 2 decades ago. According to DeRogatis' own account, the tape appeared in his mailbox in a nondescript package. No sender was identified. No return address was included and no written explanation accompanied it. According to DeRogatis, it simply appeared out of nowhere. And let's be clear, this isn't conjecture. Jim DeRogatis publicly acknowledged this version of events. He has repeated this same story in interviews, articles, and even court testimony. An anonymous package. No verifiable sender. No witnesses to its delivery. No documentation of who possessed it before it arrived. In legal terms, this is where the chain of custody instantly breaks. The moment evidence changes hands without documentation, the chain is broken. The moment evidence is handled by an unidentified source, the chain is broken. The moment no one can testify under oath to having maintained or observed the integrity of that evidence before it entered official hands, the chain is completely broken. In this case, no one knows how many people handled it before it was placed in DeRogatis' mailbox. No one knows if copies were made, if edits occurred, if substitutions were made. And with the technology of the time, VHS tapes could be easily duplicated, spliced, altered, or swapped without sophisticated equipment. Yet despite this, the Chicago court allowed the tape to be entered into evidence over the glaring absence of an authentic chain of custody. According to Federal Rules of Evidence 901 and 902, video evidence must be authenticated by testimony from a witness with knowledge, confirming that the recording is what it purports to be. Moreover, in criminal cases, especially those involving serious allegations such as these, the prosecution is required to establish an unbroken chain of custody or demonstrate sufficient proof of the item's authenticity and unaltered condition. In other words, the court should have required someone to testify about how the tape was created, who had it, where it was stored, how it was preserved, and how it reached the courtroom. None of that happened here. Instead, we had a journalist claiming it arrived mysteriously into his mailbox. And that from there, it passed through media hands and eventually to the authorities, whose own documentation of its handling was incomplete at best. The legal precedent on this issue is clear. In multiple cases, Courts across the United States have suppressed evidence where chain of custody was compromised. In the case of United States versus Lott, for instance, the 10th Circuit held that where the government failed to establish a proper chain of custody for a videotape, its admission into evidence was reversible error. Similar rulings have been issued in state courts nationwide, reinforcing the principle that evidence with an untraceable or compromised history is legally inadmissible. But in R. Kelly's Chicago trial, these precedents were disregarded. The judge allowed the prosecution to present the tape banking on its shock value rather than its verified authenticity. And it's worth asking, why would a court overlook such a fundamental evidentiary requirement in such a high-profile case? The answer lies in public pressure, media sensationalism, and prosecutorial overreach. By the time the Chicago trial came around, the court of public opinion had already tried and convicted R. Kelly. The media had long since made him a villain, documentaries like Surviving R. Kelly had been aired globally, and prosecutors were under immense pressure to deliver a conviction. In such an environment, the procedural safeguards meant to protect defendants, safeguards like proper chain of custody, were trampled in the name of optics. And let's be honest, this isn't just about R. Kelly. It's about the dangerous precedent this sets for anyone accused of a crime. If courts can begin accepting untraceable and unauthenticated evidence based solely on its shock factor or popularity, the integrity of our entire justice system is at risk. Today it's R. Kelly. Tomorrow it could be anyone. Apart from the chain of custody issue, the tape itself was never definitively authenticated. No forensic video expert testified to confirm that the tape hadn't been tampered with, duplicated, or altered in any way. No scientific testing was presented to validate its age, origin, or originality. In fact, VHS tapes can easily degrade over time, be copied, spliced, or doctored, especially with the technology available even back then. Yet none of this was addressed. The court simply relied on witnesses' reactions and identification claims based on viewing a decades-old, grainy video. Identification through video alone, especially one without proven authenticity or chain of custody, is highly unreliable, and has been debunked in various wrongful conviction cases where mistaken identity through unclear footage led to miscarriages of justice. Moreover, the defense raised legitimate concerns about the tape's authenticity and handling. But these objections were overruled. And while many would argue that objections alone aren't sufficient to suppress evidence, when combined with the absolute failure to establish chain of custody, and when no reliable authentication process has been conducted, such evidence becomes legally toxic. And it didn't stop there. The prosecution presented witnesses to testify about the contents of the tape, despite inconsistencies in their stories and questionable motives. Some of these witnesses had made conflicting statements in the past. Some were part of lawsuits, book deals, or had connections to media projects profiting off of R. Kelly's downfall. Yet the court allowed their testimonies to bolster an unauthenticated, untraceable video. The result? A verdict secured on the foundation of a tape that would never pass legal muster in any other fair courtroom. And make no mistake, this isn't a matter of defending bad behavior. It's a matter of defending the legal rights guaranteed to every American citizen regardless of their name, fame, or public standing. If we allow courts to lower the evidentiary standards because someone is unpopular or accused of shocking crimes, then we no longer have a system of justice. We have a system of spectacle. Let's remember that evidence is only as strong as its integrity. And integrity demands transparency, documentation, and verifiable authenticity. The so-called tape evidence in R. Kelly's Chicago trial failed every one of these tests. And yet it was used anyway. In closing, the Chicago court's acceptance of the de Rogatis tape, without proper chain of custody, without authentication, and without reliable expert validation, represents one of the most egregious violations of evidentiary standards in modern high-profile cases. It's a stark reminder of how easily public opinion, media narratives, and prosecutorial ambition can override legal procedure. For anyone who values fairness, due process, and the presumption of innocence, this should be deeply alarming. The fight isn't just about one man's freedom. It's about preserving the integrity of a justice system that must remain impartial and principled even when the defendant is unpopular. And that's a principle worth defending. That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say? To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.